Have you ever felt like you're trying your hardest, but it's still not enough? Like no matter what you do, you just can't keep up? What if the problem isn't your effort, but the fact you don't have the support you need? Today we're going to talk about accommodations, what they are, how they work, and how they can make the difference between constantly struggling and actually being able to succeed. Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Minds That Think Differently. I am your host, Amanda. For accessibility, I'll give a short visual description of myself. I have brown shoulder-length hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a pink t-shirt today. Today I will be talking about IEPs, 504s, and workplace accommodations and why they matter. I just want to note I'm not a medical professional and that I do make mistakes, so if I ever do, please let me know. If you have stories, questions, or would like to be on the podcast, please email connect@thinkdifferentpod.com. For transcripts, information on interviews, and more ways to listen, please visit my website, which will be linked in the description. And with that, let's get started. Before we get into the main topic, I want to start with the mailbox segment. Today's question is, how do I know if I actually need accommodations or if I'm just not trying hard enough? And I think this is such an important question because a lot of people struggle with the same thought. We're often taught that if something is hard, the solution is just to push through it. Try harder, work longer, don't give up. And while that effort is important, there's a difference between something being challenging and being inaccessible. If you're constantly feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, or like you're falling behind even when you're trying your best, that's not a personal failure. That's often a sign you might need support. Accommodations aren't about making things easier for no reason. They're about removing barriers so you can actually show what you're capable of. So if you've ever wondered whether you really need accommodations, I want you to start thinking less about whether something is hard and more about whether you have the support you need to do it. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Before I start the episode, I want to note that the accommodations and laws I'm referencing are all in the US only. If you do not live in the US, do your research to see what laws and accommodations are available to you in your country. So first, I want to start off with a basic introduction of what accommodations are. Because if you're not actively seeking accommodations, you may have never heard of things like IEPs or 504s. Or you may have heard of them but not known what they actually are. Accommodations are changes or supports that help someone access the same environment as everyone else in a way that works for them. They don't give someone an advantage and they don't lower expectations. They just remove the barriers that make things unnecessarily difficult. A simple way to think about it is this. Not everyone is starting from the same place, so treating everyone exactly the same isn't always fair. Accommodations are about fairness, not special treatment. For example, if someone has ADHD and struggles with focus, an accommodation might be extended time on a test or a quieter environment. If someone has dyslexia, it might be text-to-speech or audiobooks instead of only written text. If someone has sensory sensitivities, it could be things like noise-canceling headphones or flexible seating. The goal is to make things accessible, because without accommodations, someone might fully understand the material or be capable of doing the job, but still struggle simply because of how the environment is set up. Or they might not be able to understand the material or be able to do the job without those reasonable accommodations. Accommodations don't change what you're expected to learn or do. They change how you're able to access it. So now that we've talked about what accommodations are, let's talk about what they can actually look like in real life. Accommodations are things people use every day to make life more accessible. Accommodations can look very different depending on the person, their needs, and the environment. There's no one-size-fits-all, and that's actually the whole point. In school, accommodations might look like extended time on tests, being able to take breaks, having access to a quiet room, or getting notes provided for you. For some people, it might be flexible deadlines or the ability to demonstrate understandings in different ways, like doing a presentation instead of a written assignment. For sensory needs, accommodations could be things like wearing noise-canceling headphones, sitting in a certain area of the room, adjusting the lighting, or having access to fidget tools. These might seem small, but they can make a huge difference in how overwhelming an environment feels. For executive functioning, accommodations might include things like breaking assignments into smaller steps, getting reminders, using planners or apps for organization, or having clear written instructions instead of just verbal ones. There are also social and communication accommodations. This could look like having extra time to respond in conversations, being allowed to communicate in ways that feel more comfortable, or having expectations explained clearly instead of assumed. And as I talk about these accommodations, I want you to notice how you might have seen these in your own life. You may have used these accommodations yourself or have seen others using them. Also think about accommodations that you might have not even recognized as accommodations. And something really important to understand is that accommodations aren't just for school. People use accommodations in everyday life, and everyone does, not just neurodivergent people. Things like setting alarms, using calendars, choosing environments that feel safe, or even just taking breaks when needed are all forms of accommodations that we use in our own lives. In the workplace, accommodations can look like flexible scheduling, remote or hybrid work options, having clear written instructions instead of only verbal ones, or being allowed to use headphones to reduce distractions. It might also include modified workloads, extra time for certain tasks, or a quieter workplace. For some people, it could be as simple as having a predictable routine or being able to take short breaks to regulate. For others, it might mean using assistive technology like text-to-speech software or task management tools. Also, needing accommodations doesn't mean you're quote-unquote more impaired than someone else. It just means that you're using supports that you need to function at your best, and what works for one person might not work for another. Two people with the same diagnosis can need completely different accommodations, and both are valid. So as you're listening to this, I want you to start thinking, what helps you function better? What makes things feel easier, more manageable, or less overwhelming? Because recognizing what you need is the first step to advocating for it. So now that we've talked about what accommodations are and what they can look like in real life, the next question becomes, how do you actually get them? Because while some accommodations are things you can implement on your own, especially in your daily life, in places like school and work, there are often formal systems in place that determine what support you can receive. And if you're not already familiar with these systems, they can feel confusing, overwhelming, or even intimidating. You may have heard terms like an IEP or 504 plan and not known what they mean. Or maybe you've heard people talk about accommodations but had no idea how they actually got access to them. So in this next section, I want to break that down. What IEPs and 504 plans are, how they work, and how you can start the process of getting accommodations in a school setting. Understanding the system is a really important step in being able to advocate for yourself and get the support you deserve. I'll start off with what an IEP is. An IEP is a formal plan that involves specialized instruction, supportive services, and measurable goals. These goals are reviewed on a yearly basis and regular progress reports are required. Specialized instruction may include a smaller classroom size or classroom accommodations. Supportive services may include speech or language therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, specialized transportation, or mental health counseling. IEPs come from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, as I'll be referring to it throughout this episode. IDEA is a federal special education law. An IEP is a written plan and it must include any services the school will provide, details about each service like who provides it, for how many minutes a week, where, any accommodations, any modifications, any changes to what the student is expected to learn or know, any assistive technology or tools the school will provide, and how the student will be included in general education classes and school activities. To be eligible for an IEP, you must meet the requirements for one or more of the 13 disability categories listed in IDEA, and the disability must have a negative impact on how the student is doing in school. The student must also need specialized instruction to make progress in general education. So if you don't need specialized education and you're making progress in general education, but you need some accommodations to be successful, an IEP probably isn't for you. There are 13 disability categories under IDEA. In order to be eligible for an IEP, you have to fall under one of these categories. Some schools interpret these categories differently, and these categories are broad on purpose to try and include more people with disabilities. The first category is specific learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. About 35% of students with IEPs qualify under this category. The second category is speech or language impairment and language disorders, such as lisping or stuttering. The third category is other health impairment. It covers a wide range of conditions that may limit a child's strength, energy, or alertness. Examples are ADHD, epilepsy, sickle cell anemia, and Tourette syndrome. The fourth category is autism spectrum disorder. The fifth category is intellectual disability, for example, Down syndrome. The sixth category is emotional disturbance, which covers mental health issues such as anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. The seventh category is developmental delay, which is for young kids who are late in meeting developmental milestones like walking and talking. Usually this can't be used after age 9 to 10, but it varies by state. The eighth category is multiple disabilities. This category is only used when the combination of disabilities requires a highly specialized approach, like an intellectual disability and blindness. The ninth category is a hearing impairment, including deafness. It includes a wide range of hearing issues that can be permanent or change over time, and this usually doesn't include auditory processing disorder since it's considered a learning disability, but some schools do include it here. The 10th category is an orthopedic impairment, which covers issues with bones, joints, and muscles, such as cerebral palsy. The 11th category is visual impairment, including blindness. This covers a wide range of vision problems, but if eyewear can correct a vision problem, a child wouldn't qualify for this category. The 12th category is a traumatic brain injury. This covers brain injuries that happen at some point after a child is born, including things like ABI. The final category is deaf blindness, which covers kids who are both deaf and blind. The team that creates an IEP must include the child's parent or caregiver, at least one general education teacher, at least one special education teacher, a school psychologist, and a district representative who has the power to approve the school resources for the student. A parent or caregiver must consent in writing for the school to evaluate their child, and before the school can start providing the services. The student must be evaluated once every 3 years to see if they still need an IEP. The school has to tell families in writing before the IEP team meets or makes any changes to the IEP. Disputes can be resolved with the school or all the way up to filing a lawsuit or a civil rights complaint. Now let's talk about 504 plans. So on the other hand, a 504 plan provides educational accommodations to students who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity such as eating, sleeping, standing, lifting, concentrating, or communicating. A 504 plan does not necessarily include progress reports or reviews of goals, but a 504 plan may include accommodations like increased time on exams, breaks during physical education, reduced length of assignments, or unlimited bathroom access. Basically, the purpose of a 504 is to remove barriers to learning and ensure equal access for all students in school. 504 plans come from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This is a federal civil rights law that protects against discrimination. A 504 plan is often documented in writing, but the legal requirement is that accommodations are provided even if the format varies by school. 504 plans include any accommodations, any assistive technology or tools the school will provide, the name of the person responsible for making sure the 504 plan is put into action. To be eligible for a 504 plan, a student must have a disability that impacts one or more major life activities, such as reading or paying attention. A student who doesn't qualify for an IEP might still be able to get a 504 plan. The rules for who creates 504 plans are less specific than for IEPs. The team may include the parent or caregiver, general and special education teachers, and the school principal. A parent's consent is required for the school to evaluate the student. The plan is reviewed every year, and a reevaluation is done every 3 years or when needed. The school has to tell families about a significant change to the 504 plan. Many schools send written notifications. Disputes can be resolved with the school or through lawsuits. So if you're looking for a few accommodations, such as the ones I described above or in the beginning of this episode, a 504 plan might be for you. Okay, that was a lot of information. Let's take a moment to pause and reflect. So the main differences are, to get an IEP, it must have an educational impact that requires specialized instruction. You also have to fall under one of the 13 categories I mentioned. IEPs have stricter rules for what needs to be on it and who has to make it. 504 plans are for anyone with a physical or mental disability that impacts a major life activity. 504 plans have fewer restrictions and rules than IEPs. So if you don't qualify for an IEP, you may qualify for a 504 plan. So the next question is, how do they work? For an IEP, the school must provide services and supports outlined in the IEP plan at no cost to the family. This plan is developed by a team and reviewed annually. For a 504 plan, the school must remove barriers so the student can participate in general education. The plan is also reviewed periodically, but without the same legal requirements for measurable goals or annual progress reports. A student can have both an IEP and a 504 plan, but most students will have just one or the other. The basic choice between them is an IEP is for students who need specialized instruction to access the general curriculum, and a 504 plan is for students who need accommodations to access the general curriculum without specialized instruction. IEPs are more comprehensive and legally binding, while 504 plans focus on accommodations. Both aim to ensure equal access to education, but they serve different purposes and levels of support. I want to briefly talk about my journey with accommodations. I was diagnosed in 5th grade. At the start of middle school, we tried to seek accommodations, and I was rejected because, like I've said in past episodes, I'm twice exceptional, meaning I'm gifted and disabled. And when trying to get accommodations, the giftedness overshadowed my disability. At the moment, I still have no formal accommodations, and all accommodations are ones I use myself or talk to the teacher about, like using fidget toys in class. But this is a very common problem those who are twice exceptional have, that 2E students are often overlooked since their strengths can mask where they struggle, which can make it harder for those needs to be identified and supported. And this is a good time to talk about a common misconception that those who do well in school or work don't need accommodations. This isn't true, because while we may be able to do well in school or work, that doesn't mean accommodations aren't necessary. They can still help improve the sensory environment, overwhelm, stress, and day-to-day life, and they can absolutely still be necessary for the person to continue being successful in work or school. If the school denies your accommodations, read the explanation to why they denied. If you don't understand why they denied it, you have the legal right to an explanation. You can also talk to an education advocate. If you are denied an IEP, you could seek a 504 plan. You could also ask about other extra help such as peer mentoring or a reading specialist. You can get help outside of school and explore an independent education evaluation or an IEE. If you disagree with the school's evaluation, an IEE can be conducted by an outside professional, someone not employed by the school, which can be useful if you want to challenge the school's denial of services, but generally parents must pay for this. You could also ask for mediation. You can also challenge through a due process hearing or a state complaint, which would be where an impartial hearing officer decides if your child is eligible for services, or with the state option would be a letter to the agency in charge of education in your state. These are both legal options and can be complicated. You may want to discuss these options with your lawyer first or consider other options before going to these options. You can also plan another evaluation. Save tests and papers that show difficulties. Save emails between you and your teachers that document struggles. Getting accommodations is not an easy process. If you want to start getting accommodations, you should first identify your needs and what accommodations would likely help you. You should gather documentation. What I mean by this is medical diagnoses, recent evaluations, or letters from providers explaining what you need. Start by talking with your teacher, school counselor, or special education coordinator in K-12 schools. In college, contact the Disability Services Office before the semester starts. The next thing that would happen would be an IEP or 504 meeting. If the school says no, remember to clarify, revisit documentation, and set up another meeting or escalate if needed. Getting accommodations both in school and the workplace can be a long process. You might have to deal with long wait times, stigma, denial, and frustration with the process. Now that we've talked about how accommodations work in school through things like IEPs and 504 plans, it's important to understand that support doesn't just stop when you graduate. A lot of people think accommodations are only for school, but that's not true. You have the right to accommodations in the workplace too. The difference is that the process looks a little different and a lot of people aren't taught how it works, which can make it feel confusing or even uncomfortable to ask for support. So let's talk about what workplace accommodations can look like and how you can actually advocate for them. So workplace accommodations are reasonable adjustments made to help employees perform their job effectively without fundamentally altering the core duties. In the U.S., the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, requires employers to provide accommodations upon request for employees. However, only 13.8% of people with disabilities request a change in their workplace. The low percentage is because many individuals aren't sure what workplace accommodations to ask for or how to bring them up with an employer. In the U.S., you are legally protected from discrimination when asking for support. Accommodations can matter if you have sensory needs, time management challenges, or communication differences. Accommodations help level the playing field so employees can be successful by ensuring equal opportunities so neurodivergent and disabled employees can reach their full potential. Even if you are just a teen getting your first job, you can ask for workplace accommodations, but anyone at any age working can request accommodations. Now, what are some examples of accommodations you can request specifically if you are neurodivergent? A quiet workplace. Working in a quiet area or from home to reduce distractions and sensory overload. Being able to wear noise-canceling headphones to help with sensory sensitivity, block out background noise, and improve focus on tasks. Lighting adjustments such as softer lighting or the ability to change the lighting levels. Written instructions or verbal instructions. Providing instructions in writing rather than verbally or in addition to verbal instructions can ensure clarity and give you something to refer back to when needed. And if you struggle with reading, verbal instructions might be more helpful to you. Clear and direct feedback. Requesting clear, concise, and specific feedback can help with understanding expectations and more quickly improve performance. Alternative communication methods. If you struggle with phone calls or in-person meetings, asking for communication via email can help reduce anxiety and improve communication effectiveness. The use of visual aids such as charts, diagrams, task lists, or visual schedules can help those who benefit from visual organization. It can help provide a clearer sense of what needs to be done. Flexible deadlines. Especially if you struggle with focus or time blindness, flexible deadlines can help reduce stress and allow you to deliver higher quality work. Mentorship or job coaching. Having someone to guide you, whether it's a mentor or a job coach, can help those who need extra support with organization, time management, or navigating the workplace. Task breakdown and prioritization. Breaking tasks into smaller, more manageable steps and prioritizing them can help prevent overwhelm and improve focus. Flexible work hours. Allowing adjustments to start or end times and frequent breaks to recharge or address sensory sensitivities can increase toleration of sensory stimulation for some, and can lead to less overwhelm and stress in the day-to-day work life. The use of speech-to-text or text-to-speech devices or software for those who struggle with reading, writing, or typing can help you express ideas more easily and make it easier to process information. There are many more accommodations you can make. This is not a comprehensive list, so I encourage you to do your own research and actively reflect on what accommodations you might need. So next I'm going to talk about how to identify which accommodations you might need. Focus on the specific challenges you face, and think about how changes in the work environment or job expectations can make things easier. Some specific questions are, where do you struggle the most? Is it staying focused, managing time, processing information, dealing with sensory overload? What helps you when you're having a hard time? Do you need extra time, a quieter space, or more clear communication? What helps you feel more productive? Is it the use of visual tools, assistive technology? Those are some questions you could ask yourself that will help provide a framework. But what if you have no idea what accommodations you need? Professionals can also help with what accommodations would be useful. If you're already working with a doctor, therapist, or special education teacher, they might be able to suggest accommodations that work for you. People who have seen your struggles might be able to point out what they are and maybe some solutions. Once you know what accommodations might help, it's time to prioritize, because not every accommodation may be granted or deemed necessary right away, so focus on the ones that will address the biggest barriers you may face in the workplace. It's also important to remember that accommodations might need some trial and error. What works for one person might not work for another, and even the best accommodations might need to be adjusted over time. The key is to remain flexible and open to trying new solutions. This also means maintaining open communication with your workplace about accommodations and what might need to change. Next, I want to talk about how to request workplace accommodations because it can feel intimidating, especially if it's the first time asking for support. Before making a request, it's essential to know your legal rights under the ADA. Knowing these rights can give you greater confidence to ask for what you need without the fear of discrimination or retaliation. Write down your request. While it's important to have a verbal conversation with the employer, it's also helpful to put the request in writing. This can help avoid misunderstandings and give a clear record of what's being requested should a denial occur. The tone should be professional and polite, focusing on how the requested accommodations will improve productivity and well-being at work. Schedule and practice the conversation. Practice how you will explain the accommodations you are requesting, focusing on how they will help you succeed in the role, and practice answering questions your employer might have. Engage openly with the employer. Employers may want to discuss alternatives to the proposed accommodations. Employers might not always have immediate solutions, but they should work to find a reasonable accommodation. If the employer offers a different accommodation than what was requested, it's important to assess whether it will still meet your needs. After the initial conversation, it's important to follow up in writing to confirm what was discussed and outline any next steps. If accommodations are implemented, check in regularly to make sure the accommodations are working effectively. If changes or adjustments are needed, be proactive in requesting them. In some cases, employers may push back on or even deny an accommodation request. This can happen for several reasons, such as a misunderstanding of the law or concerns about the company's resources. If you face resistance, stay calm and persistent. You can request a follow-up meeting to discuss the decision further or ask for an explanation of why the accommodation was denied. If necessary, you can ask for assistance from a vocational rehabilitation counselor or legal aid to ensure your rights are being respected. You don't need to accept a no right away. Sometimes employers need more time to review the request or make adjustments. Keep the communication open and emphasize the importance of those accommodations for your needs in the workplace. Keep in mind that I have no experience with requesting workplace accommodations, and all the information on workplace accommodations was from research I've done for this episode. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to do your own research on workplace accommodations. Before we continue, let's take a short sensory break. This episode is talking a lot about support, and for some of you that might bring up frustration or even moments where you didn't get the support you needed. So for this break, I don't want you to focus on fixing anything. I just want you to release a little bit of that pressure. If you can, gently unclench your jaw, drop your shoulders, and take a slow, deep breath. You don't have to do anything perfectly. You don't have to focus perfectly. Just notice where you're at right now. If your mind is busy, that's okay. If your body feels tense, that's okay too. Just give yourself a few seconds where you're not trying to push through anything. You're allowed to pause, and I'll be right here when you're ready to continue. Now that we've taken a moment to pause, I want to talk about something that doesn't get said enough. What if you're struggling but you don't have support? Maybe you don't have an IEP or a 504 plan. Maybe you've asked for help and been told no. Or maybe you've never asked because you're not even sure if what you're experiencing is enough to count. And if that's you, I want to be really clear about something. Struggling does not mean you're failing, and it definitely doesn't mean you're not trying hard enough. A lot of people grow up being told that if something is hard, you just need to push through it. But accommodations exist for a reason. They exist because sometimes the environment isn't set up in a way that works for your brain. And even if you don't have formal support right now, that doesn't make your experiences less real. You're still allowed to need things. You're still allowed to find ways to support yourself. And you're still allowed to struggle without blaming yourself for it. Because needing support is not the same as being incapable. And it's definitely not the same as being lazy. And this is something that I've experienced personally. Like I said, I was denied accommodations, so I've basically been self-advocating throughout middle and high school. But like I said, I do understand that asking for help can be very hard. I still feel this pressure to not seem different, especially with being twice exceptional. Accommodations aren't this pool where if someone has accommodations, there's nothing left for everyone else. It's okay to take up space and your needs are valid. You asking for accommodations isn't taking away from someone else getting them. I want to talk a bit about self-advocacy here as well. Knowing your rights is a big part of self-advocacy. Understand what the ADA and IDEA do and don't do and what rights they give you. Be assertive and stand up for yourself when requesting accommodations. Know what you want, what you do well, and have difficulty doing. Even with all the information out there, there's still a lot of misunderstandings about what accommodations actually are. So now I want to talk about some misconceptions surrounding accommodations. One of the biggest misconceptions about accommodations is that they give people an unfair advantage. Like if someone has more time for tests and similar accommodations. Accommodations don't give unfair advantages. They help make it more equal. A lot of times without the accommodations, the person would be falling behind or struggling a lot more. For example, with the extra time on tests accommodation, let's say if a test was timed at an hour, and it was reasonable that all students would be able to complete the test in 45 to 60 minutes, neurotypical students may be able to complete the test. But what if a student has tics that literally interfere with them taking the test and means they need more time? What if a student struggles with reading and processing the questions on the test and just needs more time to read and process before they can even start to answer the question? What if a student has dyslexia or another learning disability and needs extra time to try and decode what is the question even asking? What if a student uses screen readers or text-to-speech? These would all mean that if they had to take the same test as a neurotypical student in 60 minutes, many of these students would struggle to finish the test in time. Another myth is that there's a problem with over-accommodation. Some people believe that disabled students are receiving too many accommodations that lead to less fairness and lowered academic standards. This is not true. As we've talked about in this episode, accommodations are still very hard to obtain, and you have to go through a long process to see if you're even eligible for accommodations. You need documentation of the problems. You need to get approval for the specific accommodations that you want, and you have to be reevaluated to see if you even still need the accommodations. And a lot of times you will face resistance from administration and faculty. A lot of these myths about accommodations stem from ableism. The idea is that invisible disabilities aren't real or that people fake disabilities. Another misconception is that giving accommodations is up to the faculty or employer. This is false. If someone's approved for accommodations, they are legally required to be provided. There's also misconceptions surrounding workplace accommodations. A big myth is that employers can't discipline or fire employees with accommodations. Employees with accommodations are still held to the same standards, and employers are allowed to fire employees with disabilities if certain conditions are met, like if the firing wasn't because of the disability, or if even with reasonable accommodations they still were not able to perform the job tasks. Another misconception is that accommodations are always expensive or burdensome on the school or business. While some accommodations can be expensive, most accommodations are low cost or free and need little effort to change. The issue is people are stubborn to change things, which is why it seems like a burden to them, even if the accommodation is just flexible hours or providing multiple forms of communication. Another big myth is that the ADA forces employers to hire disabled people even if they aren't qualified for the job. This isn't true. To be protected from discrimination in hiring, you must be qualified for the job and be able to perform all the requirements with or without accommodations. The ADA also doesn't give hiring preferences to disabled people. Employers are allowed to choose the most qualified person for the job. What they cannot do is exclude a person that's qualified and meets all the requirements just because they are disabled. That is what hiring discrimination is. Now I will do a short recap of everything I discussed in this episode. We started out by discussing what IEPs were, the requirements, and how to get them, and then we did the same thing for 504 plans. We talked about what to do if the school denies your accommodation. We talked about what workplace accommodations are and examples of accommodations you could request. We talked about how you get workplace accommodations and how you know what accommodations you might need. We talked about self-advocacy with accommodations. And finally, we ended with some common myths surrounding both school and workplace accommodations. Then I will end with an affirmation. The affirmation for this episode is, my needs are valid and I deserve support that helps me succeed, not just survive. And the question for this episode is, where in your life are you struggling silently instead of asking for support? You can think about this on your own or email your response. In the next episode, I will be discussing special interests and hyperfixations. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know and follow on your favorite podcast platform and share with someone who might benefit from it. Whether that's a friend, a classmate, a teacher, or even a parent, these are conversations that make a real difference. I also would love to hear from you. If you've ever struggled to get accommodations, or if you have a story or question regarding accommodations, or something you want me to talk about in a future episode, you can also email me at connect@thinkdifferentpod.com. Your experiences also shape this podcast and help people feel less alone. The more we talk about this, the more we make it easier for everyone to get the support we all deserve. Thank you for listening to Minds That Think Differently, and I'll see you next time.